Welcome, Tulane families. We're so pleased that you've joined us today for our Tulane University Family Programs webinar on hurricane preparedness and response. I'm Penny Wyatt. I'm the Director of Family Programs, and I'll be moderating the webinar. I know that if you are not already from this part of Southeast Louisiana or some other part of a coast where hurricanes may be just a fact of life, that this information can be very new to you and could be anxiety provoking. So we have pulled together this information, and I'm going to introduce you to my fabulous colleagues who help guide our whole university community through situations like this, as well as other emergency situations, to reassure you that we've got procedures in place and communication systems to help all of us if we're facing one of these situations, and we want you to be as prepared as possible. So I am delighted to have these panelists tonight, Meredith Beers and Donald Veals, who are both associate directors in our Office of Emergency Preparedness and Response. I'll be the moderator, so I'll handle the Q&A when we get to that point. And again, I'll just ask you to hold your questions until we prompt you. And so without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to Meredith.
Good evening, everyone. As Penny said, I'm Meredith Beers, an Associate Director in the Office of Emergency Preparedness and Response, and we are so glad you're here tonight, and we are very grateful, Penny, for this opportunity to get to speak to our incoming families as they prepare for their next several years as being members of the Tulane community. So welcome, everyone. In our office, we want to let you know a little bit about what we do. Tonight's webinar is going to focus on hurricane preparedness, but we do want you to be aware that we actually do prepare for all hazards. Our plans can be adapted to any scenario or situation that may arise. And we want you to also know that your students will get this information through their new student orientation sessions throughout the summer. Next slide, please. So in our office, we know that anything can happen, and our alert system and our response systems are both nimble and can be adjusted to meet the needs of each incident. So in addition to our all hazards approach, we also prepare for hazards that are most likely to affect us. These include active shooter, severe weather, fires, boil water advisories, pandemics, and then of course, hurricanes, which Donald is going to start talking to you about with the next slide.
Hey, good evening, everybody, and welcome. Once again, I'm Donald Veals, one of the associate directors in our Department of Emergency Preparedness and Response. Next slide, Penny. All right, first off, you all may be wondering, how will we receive communication? Well, you could definitely sign up. Don't worry about scanning the QR codes, as Penny stated earlier. She will be sending this PDF presentation out to everyone. So don't try and worry about getting a quick QR code scan, okay? But we do have an email where you all can sign up for our family emails. There's our emergency preparedness website. Emergency website. This is the location where we have all of our recent emergencies. If you go to that website right now, it's just going to show that Tulane is operating under normal conditions. And then also we have our Tulane Today, where they're just seeing you on different information on what's going on with the university community, not just emergencies, but just anything that's going on with the university. Then once again, we have a great social media website. If y'all have Instagram or Facebook, definitely follow the university social media at Tulane U, and also follow ours at Tulane Emergency. I'm here to tell you that our social media is the best. If you see anything cool on there, myself and Meredith put it on there. If it was something kind of lame and you're like, what is that? That was probably one of our student workers, okay? Next slide, Penny. All right, hurricane communication. How will we communicate with your students? So we're going to primarily communicate with your students via email. So if they say, hey, I didn't receive that email, they definitely receive that email either from our department or either from the university. As you can see, I have this emergency website up again, emergency.tulane.edu. That is where we put any emergency that is happening around campus, especially long-term emergencies. It will be on that website. Then we have our mass notification system, which is called Everbridge. I'll talk about that a little bit later, but you will receive I'm sorry, not you, but the students will receive TU alerts. Sorry, family, you can't sign up for our Everbridge alerts. This is only for Tulane faculty, staff, and students. So your students will be able to receive emergency alerts through their text messages, also to their Tulane email address, and also through the Everbridge app as well. And I'll talk about the Everbridge app later on. And also, family, I'm here to tell you again, the Everbridge app is only for your students. You can't sign up for our Everbridge app. I do apologize about that. Next slide. So other ways they'll be receiving information, especially if they're living on campus, the HRL team will definitely be emailing them. Dining will be emailing with your students as well. Once again, have your students look at their Tulane email account every day, whether it's Sunday, because there's probably emergency shutdown, but just have them read their Tulane email accounts every day. Also, once again, there's that famous at Tulane Emergency, definitely follow us. Once the students do receive those emails from the university, especially for like a hurricane closure, follow the university instructions. Students may say, well, I may need to go back to campus. No, you may not. If there's a hurricane and the university is closed, the university is closed, especially if there's an evacuation. But once again, follow the instructions from the university. Once again, we will communicate with you. The students will get tired of us communicating with them because we love to over-communicate. Next slide, Penny. Text alerts. So parents, once again, your student will have to log into their Gibson account, and you see where that rectangular box says that says update address, phone numbers, and email. Make sure it's your student telephone number. Make sure it's their mobile number that is in the profile, because that is how our Everbridge system, our mass notification system, their information is pulled from this link here. So once again, make sure their telephone number is located there. They may put your number as emergency contact, but under this section right here, update address, phone, and email, make sure it's your student's information and not your information. Next slide, Penny. Everbridge app. We love the Everbridge app. Once again, there's a QR code for your student. It works for Android and also for Apple iPhones as well. One thing to note, your students may try and download the Everbridge app. They could download it today, but they will not be able to start an account with their Tulane email address. They may have a Tulane email address right now, but Everbridge will not let them create an account because they're not active students yet. But the week of move-in, they will be added to Everbridge. So once they get on ground here in New Orleans, I will have them just try and create that account. And once again, if they try and do it today, they'll be able to download the Everbridge app, but they won't be able to create a account. So once again, that will not be active until they arrive as students. Another thing about the Everbridge app, it has a lot of great resources. So if you look at the blue button, it says Safe Corridor. So let's say, for example, your student is studying late at night, they're at the library and have to walk back to their residence, right? Let's say it takes them 10 minutes. So instead of them having a Tulane police officer hold their hand as they're walking from the library to their residence hall, they can actually go into the Everbridge app and click on Safe Corridor. Safe Corridor is basically a virtual escort. So once they go in, click Safe Corridor, they're going to ask for a timer. Let's say 10 minutes. Have them put in 10 minutes and start their timer. Once they arrive at their destination, they need to stop their timer. Once again, once they arrive at their destination, they're going to have to stop their timer. If not, it's going to go into alert mode, and it's going to alert a few important people. It's going to alert the deputy chief, the chief of police, our team, Tulane Police Department command staff, the supervisors on duty, Uptown Downtown Primate Center, and our dispatchers. We're going to receive a nice text message that says the student's name, their telephone number, and their GPS location. Their GPS location looks just like a Google Earth map. So if your student is coming out of the library, we're going to know. If they're coming from somewhere else, guess what? We're going to know. But once again, once that alert mode does start, our dispatchers will promptly call them up to make sure everything is okay. Then we have emergency call. Emergency call is basically Tulane Police Department number programmed into the app. So if they press the emergency call, they'll be in contact with one of our dispatchers, not an NOPD dispatcher, but a Tulane University Police Department dispatcher will answer the phone. Then we have the big red button that says SOS. That basically means I need help now. Think of it as a mobile panic button. So if they're on campus and let's say there's a event where they can't say anything, they're going to press the SOS button. It's going to give them about 7 seconds to cancel. If the SOS call goes through, the same people will be notified, but there's one fun feature. Their front-facing camera will come on. So once your student download the app, don't have them go to the SOS function and press the button to make sure it works. It works because I can tell you right now, once they press the SOS button, their front-facing camera is going to come on and it's going to record them for 2 minutes. We could hear everything and see everything that's going on with them, but we can't communicate with them. So once again, if your student press it, 2 things are going to happen. 1, we're going to send help, or 2, we're going to laugh at them. And I'm going to tell you right now, we've laughed more than we actually send help because a lot of students just press it to test it or they press it by accident. But once again, Tulane Police Department and our dispatchers, we're going to notify your student. We're going to go to their red cell to check with them. The first week of school last week, Tulane Police Department actually pulled a student out of class because he kept hitting the SOS button by accident. So once again, it definitely works. Have your student download it as well. Next slide. Also, for all of you parents, you can opt into our movement alerts. So let's say if there's inclement weather or there's some important information that we need to pass along to you during move-in week, you can opt into our TU move-in alert line. So once again, text the number 888-777 and text the word TU move in, and you'll be opted into our move-in alert line. Next slide, Penny, and I'll pass it over to Meredith.
Thank you, Donald. So now let's get to why we're here, hurricane preparedness. Next slide, please, Penny. So hurricane season starts in a few days, and we'll be in hurricane season through the end of November. The peak of hurricane season, which is when historically we see the most activity, is from late August until mid-September, which is right around the time that your student is arriving and then beginning classes. So just something to be aware of. We are definitely aware of that. When a storm forms in the Atlantic Ocean, we love these storms. We get over a week's notice to watch them develop, see them come, and implement our plans if the forecast has New Orleans in the track. So these are great storms for us. We have a lot of really good information that we can use to make our decisions and lots of lead time to implement those plans. When a storm forms in the Gulf of Mexico or just south of the Gulf of Mexico in the Caribbean, we get less time to prepare. We usually have, on average, about 4 days. So regardless of where the storm forms and what its track is, we're going to try to let you know what our decision is, whether we're going to close and shelter in place or close and evacuate about 2.5 to 3 days before landfall. We pick those times because that gives us some pretty more accurate forecasts than something that's 4 or 5 days out, but still gives you the lead time that you need for you and your student to implement your hurricane plans. Next slide, please. So with hurricanes, there are several hazards that we can expect, including high winds, storm surge, and then heavy rainfall that can, of course, cause inland flooding. Hurricanes also can leave behind some impacts that are negative to us and that can take some time to recover from, which include power outages, which can lead to loss of internet. They can cause issues with the sewage and water board, with the drinking water and sewage pumping stations. If there's a problem with potable water and the pressure with the city's drinking water pumps, then we can go into a boil water advisory. There can also be flooding, and then the other issue that we often see are supply chain disruptions and interruptions, and then fuel shortages. So these are all things that we do consider as we are planning. Next slide, please. So when a storm is forecast to actually enter the Gulf, there are 3 things that we can do. Our first option is to close and shelter in place. If we do this, this means that we're going to transition to online or remote classes or cancel classes. We will cease our normal business operations, and our on-campus students, our students who live in our residence halls, will shelter in place in their residence halls. When we make this decision, it's because we anticipate that the expected impacts to New Orleans and the university will be manageable. Our next option is to close and evacuate. If we make this decision, then we will be canceling classes, we will cease our normal business operations, and everyone must evacuate. No one can remain on campus except some select designated personnel who must remain on campus to ride out the storms and then conduct disaster assessments immediately following the storm. People that do ride out storms for any storm are our office, our police department, facilities services, and then some folks from dining services and custodial services. One thing about evacuation, as a university, we can declare that our population must evacuate, even if the city of New Orleans does not declare an evacuation. However, if the city of New Orleans declares a mandatory evacuation, then we must follow that guideline. So don't be surprised if there is a chance that we could evacuate, but the city does not make that same decision. Regardless if we shelter in place or evacuate, we will run Tulane shuttles to the airport so that students can evacuate. Your student does have the option to implement their personal evacuation plan if the university decides to shelter in place. If we choose to evacuate, your student must implement that plan. We also have a third option, and that is if the storm is entering the Gulf, but New Orleans is not in the forecast zone or the impact area of the storm. If that's the case, then we will communicate that we are going to continue our normal operations because we are not expecting any impacts from the storm. That's our favorite option. We always hope for that one. Next slide, please. So we have three options, and the two we're really focusing on are shelter in place and evacuate. So how do we decide what we're doing? There are lots of different forecast factors that we do consider. So what is the storm size? How fast is the storm moving? What's the projected storm surge? What category of storm is the storm projected to be at landfall? And then what is the direction the storm is moving relative to where New Orleans is? So are we on the east side? Are we on the west side? Like I mentioned earlier, we do try to announce our decision 2.5 to 3 days before landfall is projected so that you and your student can implement your plans with as much time as possible. We are not making this decision in a vacuum. We consult with the National Hurricane Center, a private meteorological forecasting service called PeriWeather, and we have a local meteorologist that we talk to. We begin having calls with all of these different weather experts as soon as we see a storm forming. As soon as we know that it is very likely entering the Gulf, we are talking to all of these different groups multiple times a day. And if we are in the forecast area through landfall, we continue talking with them through landfall until the storm has cleared our area and we are no longer in a threat of a hurricane. Each storm is unique, so that means that no two storms are the same. There might be a storm that follows a path that's very similar to a storm that hit several years ago. That doesn't mean that they will act the same way or that the impacts will be the same. So each storm is considered as its own entity and not based on what happened the last time a storm was on this track. Next slide, please. So if we shelter in place and your student lives on campus, which students are required to live on campus for their first 3 years unless they are a commuter student, our residence halls and a few other buildings, including the dining hall, do maintain full power. They are on generators that allow them to maintain full power, including HVAC. As I mentioned, the peak of hurricane season is late August to mid-September when our temperatures here are anything but cool. So it's very important we keep that HVAC going. Our on-campus students will be provided with a 3-day supply of shelf-stable food, which they'll be able to use during a period when we are sheltering in place, when they absolutely cannot leave their residence halls. So this occurs from when we have the onset of tropical storm force winds through our initial damage assessment to determine if it is safe for students to leave their buildings and start going around campus. We're checking to make sure that there aren't downed wires, that there aren't obstructed paths, and that our key buildings that we will open, like the dining hall, can be used. Just a word of warning that they could be in shelter-in-place mode where they cannot leave their residence halls for upwards of 24 hours. So that's why we provide a 3-day supply of shelf-stable food. The food that is provided also can be meet the various dietary restrictions that students may have for vegan, vegetarian, nut allergies. So our dining provider does provide a variety of options to meet whatever dietary restrictions your student may have. Additionally, when we shelter in place, all activities cease on campus, and that includes closing the Riley Recreation Center and the library. The Riley Recreation Center will close several days before landfall because that becomes a location that essential personnel who need to be on campus during the storm to support emergency operations and the student life that is occurring on campus from having students sheltering in place, that is where they move. So those amenities that your students might normally use are not available until we reopen campus. Next slide, please. So if or when your student moves off campus, they will need to be prepared to shelter in place at their off-campus residence. And some things that we recommend that they have, which are good for hurricanes, but also just good emergency supplies to have on hand, are bottled water, non-perishable food, flashlights, batteries, first aid kits, enough of those supplies to last themselves, any roommates they have, and then any pets, emotional support animals, or service animals that they have for several days. While your student may want to come to campus if they live off campus to ride out a storm, we cannot guarantee that we will have space to accommodate them, which is why they need to prepare their off-campus residence. One thing to be aware of is with the winds that come with hurricanes, it's very likely that they will lose power, and power often is down for several days to even weeks following hurricanes. As mentioned earlier, one of the other impacts of power loss is it impacts the sewerage and water board, and so we could enter a boil water advisory, which is why it's important that they have a good supply of bottled water on hand at their off-campus residence. And then once the storm passes, we don't want your student to immediately come to campus because we're still conducting our damage assessment to make sure that it's safe. So they'll need to remain at their off-campus residence until we send an all clear, which will go out as a TU alert that Donald was talking about earlier, telling them they may now come to campus. If they come to campus beforehand, we will ask them to return to their off-campus residence because we are still assessing the safety of our campus for anyone to be moving around. Next slide, please. So if they evacuate, what should they take? The first piece is to figure out how long to plan to be gone. And we recommend planning for at least 5 days. So your student should take the obvious things: clothes, medications, the prescriptions, and over-the-counter, any personal hygiene supplies they need, an emergency contact list that is written on paper. So names, phone numbers, and emails, just in case their phone dies while they are in transit from New Orleans to wherever they're evacuating to. This one's very important. They should take anything that they will need to attend classes remotely or virtually. So laptops, chargers, iPads, any books and notes. If they forget something, once campus closes, they will not be allowed back on campus. If they are found on campus, they will be taken before the Student Affairs Disciplinary Committee. And that's because we have closed, because it's a safety issue. So it is for their safety that once we close, they cannot be here. They should also take portable chargers. These are great to have at the airport or in long car rides. So if your iPhone or Android starts dying, you can charge it back in. So we definitely recommend having a few of those on hand that they keep charged at all times. And then valuables and sentimental items. We actually encourage you to think about Do you really want to send your child to school with these items? Because if they get lost at any point while they're at college, are they replaceable? What would be the loss for something that has high sentimental value or is a family heirloom? So really do consider if these are items that your student should bring to Tulane at all. If your student evacuates, whether we are sheltering in place or is evacuating because we have said you must evacuate, they should take these items with them so that there isn't a chance that they are lost during the storm, because that's something that you don't want to have to face that loss. Next slide, please. So evacuating, we've talked about, it's very important that your student have a personal evacuation plan that decides where they are going and how they are getting there. You and your student should come up with several options. We want to make sure that your student does have a plan, so they need to submit it in the housing portal by May 22nd. But what happens if something changes? Plans change. We know that. We work in emergency preparedness. Our plans change all the time. That's why we write them to be flexible. We're flexible too with this. After May 22nd, if your student's plan changes, that's fine. That happens. Just make sure that they do go in and change it in the housing portal. Your student's primary plan should not be for us to evacuate them. We are not the primary plan. If your student evacuates with us, they are going to be going to a shelter in another city that's about 6 hours away. They will be sleeping on a gym floor. We cannot guarantee that there will be cots. There might be air mattresses. It's communal living, communal restrooms. It is not comfortable, but it is safe. And that's why we want them to have their own plan that can be implemented separate from us, aside from the shuttles to the New Orleans airport. So what's an example of a personal evacuation plan? That they're going to go to the New Orleans airport and fly home, or to a friend's city, or to a city where a relative lives. That's a great plan. Another plan is that you would come pick them up or send a family member to come pick them up and then drive them home or to another city. But plans change. We know that. I went to Tulane as a student and evacuated for 2 hurricanes when I was a student. And for one of them, I took 9 friends home. My mother was really surprised when we showed up on the doorstep, and she thought I had been kidding that I was bringing 9 people. I was not, but 5 of the people that were coming with us, their plans had been to fly home, and I had room in my car. And so they hopped in the car and we went to Texas. So plans can change. We know they will change, but make sure that y'all have multiple options and that we are your very last resort. Next slide.
Thanks, Meredith. All right, your role in advance of the storm. Going back to what Meredith stated earlier, make sure it is your plan. Your plan is always plan A, plan B, plan C, plan D. Tulane University should be plan Z. And then going back to evacuation, you all were probably on a parent tour, and someone said, oh, for Hurricane Ida, we went to Houston, we stayed in hotels. We do not stay in hotels anymore. Remember, that was during COVID, where there's a lot of vacancy in hotels then. We're not in COVID anymore. Hotels are booked. We will not be utilizing hotels for evacuation. So going back to what Meredith said, make sure you and your student do have your evacuation plan that's in the housing portal. Keep it up to date. If anything changes, definitely go back, update it. If we are going to evacuate, we will send out that survey again to have them put in any updated information just in case anything does change for their evacuation plan. It's okay to evacuate your student if we decide to shelter in place, but once again, make sure your student communicate with their professor. That is key. Communicate with their professor. Also, have your insurance belongings be insured. One of the things that we ran into with Hurricane Ida, a lot of things students didn't have covered, and a lot of their expensive items, they didn't have serial numbers. So if your student is bringing anything expensive, like a PS5, and it gets damaged, just make sure that they have their serial numbers. And you notice on one of the slides, Meredith had Rolex in there as an example. We put Rolex in there because Hurricane Ida, a student left a $25,000 Rolex behind. So think about what your students are bringing. If it's anything of value, please have insurance on it. Next slide, Penny. So if we do have to evacuate, some things to think about. Where will your student go? I'm going to say 2 places not to go: Corpus Christi, Texas, and Miami, Florida. Once the storm enters the Gulf, it could go anywhere. So if the storm is heading west, don't go towards Houston, okay? One thing we always recommend going 250 to 300 miles north or away from the storm. If a storm does follow you 250 to 300 miles north, by the time it gets to you, it's just going to be rain, and you're not going to have to fight with those hurricane force winds, all right? Something to consider. When will you and your student make the decision to stay or leave? Once again, we're going to send out communication. If you have any questions, definitely reach out to Meredith and I. We will have our contact information at the end of the presentation. How will your student get there? Will they travel with a family friend? I know there was one family whose roommate lived here. They evacuated with the roommate to Texas, and the roommate lived in Texas. Okay, there's a lot of options out there. Just work with your student. If you're happy with the student evacuation plan, guess what? We're happy with it as well. As long as you all have a plan that you agree upon, that is perfect. If your student has a service animal, emotional support animal, think about them as well. Have emergency supplies for your emotional support animal, whether it's a toy, sanitary supplies, food, medication. Just remember your pet is part of the plan as well too. Next slide, Penny. Your role, once again, you see that emergency.tulane.edu website, right? We put a lot of information on there. A lot of you will probably be part of the Tulane Family Facebook page. That is not an official source of information, okay? Once again, reach out to us, reach out to the university. If you have any questions pertaining to anything university evacuation related, hurricane related, reach out to the professionals. And also, one thing we do recommend, don't sit back and watch the Weather Channel. It could be overwhelming. We have 3 great local stations here: WWL-TV, Fox 8, and WDSU. They have great apps. You can stream their broadcast live. Look at the locals. Don't look at the Weather Channel. They overhype it every time. If anybody on here works at the Weather Channel, I do apologize, but follow our local news. The other thing I do not recommend, do not sign up for NOLA ready alerts as a parent. Do not. You're going to get a lot of text messages that does not pertain to Tulane University, but definitely have your student download it. It's a great source of information, especially if they're out in the city exploring. The city does send out timely alerts at times, especially for tornado warnings. We're going to do the same thing too. But once again, family, do not sign up for NOLA ready alerts, only unless you live here in New Orleans. I said this earlier, remind your students to check their Tulane email address. We will always communicate with your student, okay? So make sure they have access to it and they can check it. Next slide, Penny. Once again, we said this earlier, students should follow all instructions from the university. You see that famous website, you get emergency.tulane.edu. What I told you earlier, we love to over-communicate. We're doing it right now. By the time this presentation is over, you're gonna remember emergency.tulane.edu. Go there for any Tulane emergency information, okay? Students shouldn't return to the university. Once again, we're going to send out messaging on the status of the university. Just because the storm has passed doesn't mean, ooh, I could go back to campus. No, you may not. As Meredith stated earlier, we do have to go back and conduct our building assessments to make sure it is safe for our students, faculty, and staff to return. Students should be prepared to attend classes remotely. Have your students bring their books and laptops. Once again, have your students bring their books and laptops. Don't just bring a couple of clothes. If we have to evacuate, it's not for a hurricane, hurricane party or anything like that. One thing we found out we could do good, we found out that we could do good is have remote classes. That's one thing COVID taught us, and we do it well. We will start our classes on Zoom if we have to. We did it during Hurricane Ida. We will probably do it for any future hurricanes as well. Make sure they bring their laptop and their books home as well. Next slide, Penny. Any questions? And Penny, you can move on to the next slide as well. This is our contact information. Our department email address is emergencyprep@tulane.edu. We have our great website, emergencyprep.tulane.edu. And Meredith and I have two hard email addresses. Hers is meredith@tulane.edu, and mine is donald@tulane.edu. So if you have any questions, definitely reach out to Meredith and I. One thing we love to do is communicate with our parents. So if you have any questions and want the most accurate information, definitely email us. And if we don't know, we'll get the information back to you from one of our campus partners. Thank you again. I'll pass it over to Penny.
Okay, so as we mentioned, we'll send you all this information. So I'm just going to go back to this question slide. And I wanted to mention a couple of things or ask a couple of questions of our presenters. So while I'm doing that, you all can start typing in your questions. So I did want to acknowledge that we know today is the 29th of May, and that deadline for your students to submit their plan was May 22nd. That was the deadline that was originally given to them because that's when they had to submit their housing application, and they do both of those things together. But if they haven't already done that, they can still submit their plan. If after listening to and watching this webinar, you've got some new things to consider with your student about what their evacuation plan would be, then they can still log into that system and refine or change their plan. So, and even if later in the summer you get some new information, you've talked with family members, you've got a new idea of how you would manage this, then they can still do that. And it's just helpful for that information to be in there so that if we do have to evacuate, we've got that database of where students are going or how they made a plan and all of that. But it's very much so that your family thinks about what's going to work for your student. So so keep that in mind. We recognize there's that difference in the dates. One of the students' components of their online orientation modules that they have for the month of May is about hurricane preparedness. So I know a lot of times parents and family members will watch our webinars and get kind of anxious because they're, well, this is I'm getting this information. How is the student getting this information? So that's where this is first introduced to them. So as our presenters have noted, they will get a lot of alerts and guidance. And since they'll all be required to live in the residence halls, our residence hall professional staff members will be there to also provide guidance, and there will be people there who are gathering the students and giving them information, personally, in addition to what they get through email and text alerts and, electronically in certain ways. So I want you to be aware of that. Then I also thought that I might ask Meredith if you'd explain a little bit more about the image of the students lying on the floor in the hallway and explain kind of why that's happening, the difference between kind of hunkering down in their room versus being out in the hall.
Yes, so thank you, Penny. That's a really good question. So that was from a shelter in place from, I believe it was Hurricane Zeta in 2020. That was a late season storm that hit right before Halloween weekend. And that storm, we did have students move out of their residence halls into the Lavin Burnick Center for that storm because some of our residence halls at the time had exterior hallways. And so we wanted students to not have that. We wanted them in a building that had interior hallways. So if we needed to say, get away from the windows, they would be able to do that and do it safely in that building. Currently, if we need to move students out of a residence hall to shelter and during a shelter in place, for any reason, we move them now into the Devlin Fieldhouse, which is our basketball arena. And so right now we do not have any residence halls with exterior hallways, but if there is an active construction site, like with a crane, which is something that Our cranes that we use can withstand very, very high winds, but we know it makes people nervous that if there is a crane next to a residence hall, then we would move those residents into the basketball arena for that storm. So,
And Meredith, my recollection too, from having worked in the residence halls in the past, is that while we might have people sheltering in place for, many, many hours, like you said, if there's a point at which wind speed is at a certain level, then we might ask students to move out of their rooms and into the hall, just so they're even farther away from windows, correct?
correct. So once we hit tropical storm force winds, which are about 35 miles per hour, that's when we tell them they can no longer leave their building. But if we start seeing winds that it's typically around 90 plus miles per hour, that's when we will send a TU alert. So again, having them make sure that their cell phone number is in Gibson under their contact information is so important. We'll send a TU alert instructing them to go into the interior hallway of their residence hall, just to give them one more layer between windows and where they are.
And then another thing that I just wanted to mention, because I've had parents ask this question over the years, is just to explain that there is a big difference between the kind of text alert system that you may have experienced during your students' K through 12 experience, where if there were some kind of, active emergency on your student's school campus, you were probably expected to come pick them up. You're in the city with them. And so they might, evacuate the campus building, and you're supposed to go pick them up at a building across the street or something. And so parents had to be a part of that. And the students were, they weren't adults yet. They, lived right there. You had to be responsible for them. So things do change. And our system is designed so that it alerts the people who are potentially in harm's way. So that's why it's only for, students, faculty, and staff who receive those alerts by text message. So I do think that once you get this material again, if you'll look back at those websites and the alerts that can be sent to you, then rely on those for updates. And I think our university communications office does a fantastic job of collaborating with Donald and Meredith to make sure that accurate, updated, helpful, comprehensive information is going out in those public spaces so that you could be aware of what's needed. So I know that can sound concerning when you've always been the one in the past to get those in the moment alerts. But our system works differently at the university level. Another thing I wanted to ask our presenters to just answer is that move in text alert functional now, or will that launch later in the summer when we're closer to move in? Like, can they already sign up for those text alerts at that number that you provided?
Yes, they can, Penny. It is active and it does work. I tested it myself.
Okay, so you won't get any messages yet, but if you wanted to go ahead and just be ready, as this hashtag says, then you could go ahead and sign up for that when we send you all this information again. So, so the other thing that I want to take a quick beat to just reinforce is that we really do need you to rely on these official communications that will come from these emergency preparedness professionals, from the official Tulane channels, our official Tulane social media, and looking on the website. If we go into this mode, then on the front page, the Tulane homepage, there will be this bright colored banner that goes across it that will show where you linked, where you can link through to the most current, up-to-date situation, preparedness, what type of phase we're in, and kind of what the latest alerts are. And there'll be archives, so you can kind of read backwards to see, how information has been building as conditions change. But the most up-to-date information will be there. So I just can't stress enough that it's very, very important that you pay attention to that official communication, because there might be parents of older students or even students who've already graduated and they're still in those different unofficial Tulane Facebook pages, parent Facebook pages and groups. And so they might describe procedures that we're no longer using, or they might give information that worked for them in a completely different scenario. And just remember what Meredith said about how each storm can be different and have its own nuances. So it's really, really important that just keeping in touch with the official mechanisms for communication. So that's my plea to you. So, and we've got a couple of questions, and they're really both about the same thing. And so the question I'll pose to our presenters is, how often have you had to implement sheltering in place or evacuation?
So I've worked at Tulane for 6 years, and each storm season is different. There is always a forecast that is put out by some of the best experts in hurricane forecasting in the world for each season, with how many named storms were expected and how many are expected to make landfall. As wonderful as those forecasts are, what the technology hasn't been able to do yet is tell us where those storms are going to land. So no matter what the forecast number is, how high or low it is, we prepare every year like we are going to be hit by a very big storm, because it only takes one to interrupt how we function. So we are constantly preparing. My first year, 2018, we didn't have any storms. That was a really good year. 2019, we sheltered in place once. 2020 was not only an active season for the entire Atlantic basin, but it was a very active season for the Gulf and Louisiana in particular. We sheltered in place 6 times that season. It was a record-breaking year. And we got very, very good at our shelter in place operations. We improved them with each storm, and that was our most practiced and well-rehearsed and implemented plan of that year, aside from our pandemic plan. And then in 2021, we had 2 hurricanes come. The first was Hurricane Ida, which we sheltered in place for and then evacuated for because there was a catastrophic failure of the city's power grid when one of the transformers was blown into the Mississippi River. And so because there wasn't any power, which is completely insufficient, for the entire city, and Entergy, which is our electric provider, was estimating 6 weeks to restore power to the entire area. We made the decision for life safety reasons that we needed to close and evacuate. And so we did a post-storm evacuation. It was our first. And then while we were recovering from Hurricane Ida, another storm came through, but we didn't have anyone here. So the employees that were working on recovery got to shelter in place for that one. When I was a student, I mentioned earlier, I went to Tulane for undergrad. At that point in time, that was 20-ish years ago at this point. At that point in time, the university didn't have the capability to shelter in place. There weren't backup generators for the residence halls. And so if a storm came, we evacuated. And so we evacuated in 2004. And then for Hurricane Ivan, which ended up not hitting Louisiana, it went to Alabama. And then in 2005 for Hurricane Katrina. And for that one, the university closed and reopened in January 2006. So like Penny said, each year we get better at this. The technology, the backup power supplies that we have all improve. And so year after year, we do improve, tweak, update our plans based on what's available. And again, it all depends on what happens with the hurricanes. Donald, do you have anything to add to that?
No, Meredith, you covered it. Thanks.
And parents and family members, I just want to stress that we don't offer all this information to overly alarm you. It's to prepare you. And so I think more important than how many of these we've had in the past, because if you talk to any of us who've lived through these, then we've got stories and stories and stories. But what we want you to learn from our past experiences are the best hacks to get your student prepared in case something happens. And so we just hope that you'll take this to heart, all of these good examples that we've given of things to really sit down with your student and ask them, what did you learn from that module that you had to do online as part of your orientation process, about hurricane preparedness? I just went to the parent webinar and we learned a lot of things. Let's put our heads together and think about any changes we need to make to the plan that you submitted. What can we do differently? Do we have all of these items that they talked about, like, a written list of your emergency contacts? Make sure that they have that with them before you leave, when you drop them off, when you help them move in. Think about those power banks, for charging phones and things like that. Those are all good things to just make sure you get over the summer, and they're a part of what they're going to bring with them for move-in. So, so we really do want to give you this information to help you all be as prepared as possible, and help your student make those decisions. So another question is, what are the primary obstacles in the existing hurricane evacuation strategies, particularly in light of escalating demographic expansion in coastal regions? Well, this is a great big policy question that they're asking. What alterations in policies or new methodologies would you propose to enhance the efficiency of evacuations and ensure public safety? Well, this is something that is a great big question that goes beyond just Tulane. So I'll toss that to you guys and see. We are about to run out of time, so I just want to ask parents if you have any remaining questions, and please type them in quickly so we can get to those before we close.
Yep. Penny, this is a really great policy question, like you said, and I wish I could influence statewide regional policy, but I can't. But I can say that if I lived further south along the coast, because we're about 90 miles inland here, I would be taking stock of how well would I be able to stay during a hurricane? How well will my house withstand it? What special needs might I have, maybe medical needs or those in my family, to be home throughout a storm, and then after, when there will be loss of infrastructure that could take days to weeks to even months to repair. And I would then decide, do I want to go through that, or should I evacuate, even if there isn't a mandatory evacuation? And I would say the same to our students right now, especially those who live off campus. If you don't want to go through several days of not having power, then really think about evacuating. I will tell you personally, if I weren't having to be at work for every storm, I don't like not having electricity. I like my air conditioning. I like my Netflix. I like being comfortable. I have an electric stove, not a gas stove. I like being able to cook food. I would evacuate if a storm were coming. But I do have to come to work, so I don't have to make that decision. But I would encourage people who have that option to really think about what is the level of comfort that they are willing to forego following a storm and during a storm, and what are the needs of their families to make sure that everybody is safe and comfortable.
So I want to make sure we get to these last couple of questions. And one is that if the students are sheltering in place and the residence halls have HVAC, they won't need portable chargers, will they? Or is that only for an airport or car journey? I think it's always good for them to have this, because even if it's something that they want to keep in their backpack, already charged in case they're off campus or they're somewhere studying with a friend or something and their phone battery dies. And but yes, we would just want them to have that for those times when they might be away from a power source. It's just one of those things that we see students typically need. And
yeah, hey, Penny, can I add something?
yes.
A portable charger could be something as small as this. I keep these with me for anyone who follow us on social media. We do have a few giveaways. I give these out a lot. This is just something good to have, especially if you're out with your friends, in case there's an emergency, because one thing we know a lot of our students aren't good at is charging their devices. So this is just something good to have. They could be as small as this or even like little sticks. So once again, follow our website. We're definitely going to be doing a lot of giveaways for portable chargers as well. But it's something that everyone on this phone call should have, and all of your students should have a portable phone charger.
Okay.
Oh, the other thing, Penny, is get the one with the built-in cords. just
Yeah.
so that they won't be able, just so that they won't be grabbing, cords in a portable charger.
Right.
They can just grab the portable charger with the embedded cords attached to it.
That's a great suggestion. So,
And then be sure to
Okay.
charge them after use.
right.
Recharge them after you've used them. I used mine at Jazz Fest this year. It was a lifesaver. I gave my best friend one for her birthday, which was not the gift she was expecting, but she used it at Mardi Gras. They really are just good everyday tools to keep, just like you would take your wallet, take that.
Right. So another question is, are there problems getting flights from the airport? So this is one of the reasons why Meredith and Donald and their team are going to try to make those decisions and give advice as early as they are capable of, so that your family can book a flight. And I think that one of the reasons why we also tell you to kind of think divergently and have a couple of different options embedded in your plan and in your preparation thinking is that it might be easier, faster, less expensive to get your student on a flight to one of your family members. Maybe not all the way home if you live very, very far away or you're not near a big airport hub. And so, think about that too, that we'll help them get to the airports. We'll run shuttles from campus to the airports to help them get there so they're not having to compete with everybody else in town for cabs and Ubers and Lyfts and all of that. But think about, what are some of the different options, and maybe home is not the first choice for your flight destination for your student. There might be some other ways that you go about that. And then
And
I
Penny,
think
I
that-
would just add to that when we see a storm forming that looks like it could impact New Orleans, so if it forms in the Atlantic, we're not going to send an email right then. As soon as it looks like something will be entering the Gulf, our first communication will go out, and family members do receive that says, we know something is there. We see it, we're starting our preparations. That should be your cue to start looking at flights with your student. The airport is great here. They do bring in extra planes so that they can help. We have a lot of conferences, conventions here. Great tourism city. We have really great food. Y'all should definitely make sure you eat out while you move your student in. But they want to make sure that as many people can leave as possible. So there are extra flights, but they do stop about a day before landfall, kind of depending on some factors of the storm. But there are extra flights. But like Penny said, you may need to fly your student to a city that isn't where you live, and then either they connect there to where you're from, or they stay in that city with other family or family friends.
And as I've heard these emergency preparedness professionals say in prior webinars, other years, the airlines are also trying to get all of their planes away if something is coming. And so they'll try to reroute those planes and add those extra flights and get the equipment, out of the way, out of harm's way. So, that's something to consider, but definitely don't wait and make the decision that seems to work best for your family. As long as your student is communicating with their professors, if they have to make a decision early enough for it to work, then we really kind of honor that. But we do expect that with that flexibility, there's a responsibility on the student's part to check their email, once they can. Keep up with what's going on with Tulane. Use the online resources for their courses. Communicate with their professors. A lot more of the options for materials for students' courses are online. And so they've got more options like that. They don't even have to get physical books all the time anymore. And so that also helps them be able to pack what they need and leave, but still be able to work remotely if they need to. So as Meredith mentioned earlier, if there's one thing the pandemic did for us, it was that it enhanced all of our abilities to work remotely. So even to take care of schoolwork and, classes and coursework, and all of that. So I think that, everybody can be understanding of what your plan is as long as the students communicate and stay in touch. So I think it's that flexibility has to be coupled with responsibility and communication.
Yes.
So,
one more thing about the airport and getting flights that I think we neglected to mention earlier, so I'm glad we have this chance now, is make sure that your student has a ticket booked for a flight before they go to the airport.
Yes.
Do not try to buy a ticket at the gate, at the ticket counter at the airport. Their chances of getting a seat in that case are much less, particularly if the city has declared a mandatory evacuation. So make sure when they are getting on the shuttle from Tulane to the airport, they've already got their mobile boarding pass and are ready to go. I would also encourage that if your student is flying home or flying out of New Orleans is their option, that normally getting to the airport an hour, hour and a half before their flight is fine. In a hurricane situation, I would increase that, 3 hours, 4 hours earlier. And if they need to miss a class to make that happen, again, like Penny said, like Donald has said, just communicate with the professors. They are implementing their personal evacuation plan in advance of hurricane, whatever it is. And, they will make up the coursework, work with the professor to make up whatever they miss in that class.
And I just want to also reassure the family members who are with us tonight that you've heard both of these presenters talk about how long they've been with Tulane and how long they've lived in New Orleans even before that. And I've been here for a long time, and I feel very confident in our emergency preparedness office and their ability to give us really great advice and guide us. And so we might do things at Tulane earlier than the rest of the city may, and that's intentional. And so I guess I do want you to pay attention to that and feel reassured about that. So if you'll stay in touch with what we're doing and follow the communications, I think that's really important. And stress to your student that they really do need to follow directions, be attentive. It is not a time to play or party, or, do any of that. They need to take it seriously. But I do feel like we get really good guidance at Tulane, and we've got experienced people leading the way. So I hope that, even though I know this is one of those topics that can be anxiety provoking, as I said at the beginning, I hope that we've provided some information that helps you feel more ready and prepared and gives you some steps to take to enhance that preparedness. So I do just want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. And I especially want to thank Meredith and Donald for everything they do and for providing this information for all of you. Again, you'll receive a follow-up email in a few days with the slides and the link to the webinar recording. I see a lot of people sharing applause, so I'm really grateful for that. Especially want Donald and Meredith to see that that appreciation is coming through. If you have any comments that you'd like to leave in the Q&A function, you're welcome to type those in really quickly before we end. Or we always encourage you to email families@tulane.edu. If you want to send feedback to me that I can forward on to our presenters, that's lovely. I'm happy to do that. We always value the contributions and the feedback that you offer, because it helps us improve things in the future. And so something that you might have appreciated tonight could have been a suggestion from a parent several years ago. So we're, continuously improving things. And then if you have suggestions for topics for future webinars, you can also email those to me. So we're going to close here now in a second. So just want to thank you again for your attention and time tonight, and just thank you for being attuned to this and wanting to help your student be as prepared as possible. So thanks again to Meredith and Donald. Thanks, everyone. We hope you have a great evening. Thank you.